G'day everyone and welcome to Inside Rugby with Mark. My name is Mark. I'm a Kiwi rugby fan living here in beautiful Cancun in Mexico. And in this video I'm going to talk about my thoughts around that last game between Ireland and Scotland this last weekend in the Six Nations competition. Ireland, of course, ending up winning the championship this year. Got some thoughts to share around that, some of the players that stood out for me, and where do we go now with Ireland rugby into the rest of the year. All coming up in this video. One of the things I want to ask fans of Irish rugby was this year's Six Nations competition win better than last year, or was last year's better? Tell me why in the comments. I'm looking forward to that. So it was all built up as a fantastic showdown, wasn't it, at the Aviva Stadium in Dublin in the weekend. Ireland versus Scotland, the last game for both teams in this year's 2024 Six Nations competition. And of course, Ireland coming off that loss to England at Twickenham, and Scotland coming off the loss against Italy. So both teams coming into this game after losing their previous game. Now, what was really interesting for me was before the game even got underway, and Peter O'Mahony showing a lot of emotion during the national anthem. And as we all know, he may not be playing anymore for Ireland. We'll have to wait and see on what the decisions are around his future. But he shed a few tears and a very emotional anthem playing before the game got underway, which was great to see. And well, it started off and it was basically a bit of an arm wrestle to start off with. And what I really like about this Irish team, and if you look at All Black teams of the past and South African teams of the past who have dominated world rugby for many, many years, you'll see that these teams are able to win games when they're not playing so well. And that's something that I admire about this Irish team. Because even though they might have a couple of their good players missing, they had Hugo Keenan out of this game and they've got Mac Hansen out, of course, at the moment. But this Irish team are always able to turn up and be able to play rugby at a standard high enough to put their opposition under a lot of pressure. And that's what we saw in the early stages of this game against Scotland. And on the flip side of this, Scotland, well, they have kind of mental phases throughout the games, don't they? You don't know what's going to happen from one phase of play to the next with Scotland. We've seen it throughout this tournament. They've been very inconsistent. And that's probably a word that I would use to describe the Scottish team throughout the Six Nations competition this year. Inconsistency. And I think it's caught them out on a number of occasions. If we rewind our minds back to that first game against Wales, they had a great lead, didn't they? 27 points or so heading into that second half, and then they just switched off and they went into La La Land, and Wales came storming back at them. And we've seen that in different phases. They didn't turn up in the first half against France, and they should have, would have, could have won that game as well. Close in the first half, and there was a lot of seesawing going on. We saw a couple of players standing out for me. Hugh Jones and Kinghorn in particular for Scotland were doing good stuff, but Gibson Park was playing really well for Ireland, and we saw Bundy Aki doing his typical thing, not only on offensive runs but also some great defence from him as well. So we got to half time and it was 7-6 to Ireland, and I just thought through that try that they scored by Dan Sheehan and the conversion by Crowley, that they had more momentum in the game than Scotland. And this is what I was talking about when I talked about Scotland not having the ability to go the whole 80 minutes. They were hanging in there with Ireland, there was no doubt about it. But what was going to happen in the remainder of the game? We've seen Scotland turning off for too long in their different games. Ireland on the other level, they were probably playing at about 65-70% of their capacity in this game up until half time. But again, they were doing enough to put the pressure on the Scots. They were winning the scrums well, and they were doing well in the lineouts as well. So they were putting on the pressure where they needed. And I must say, every time they got the ball and they started an attacking phase where they put 10 or 12 phases of play together, they looked way more dangerous than what Scotland did, and they looked like they were going to break through the Scottish defensive line. On the other side, Scotland, you could tell, were having trouble getting through the Irish defence, and as we've seen throughout the tournament, the Irish rush defence was doing the job against Scotland. So Scotland were trying a couple of things. Finn Russell were trying to put some kicks in behind, but Lamore, who came in at fullback, was playing well for Ireland, and he brought the ball back very well connected with James Lowe on the wing and Calvin Nash, and they were able to put pressure back on Scotland in returning the ball in play. So that was an aspect that stood out for me during the first half of this game. Stafford McDowell had come in for Scotland in this game in the absence of Tupalotu, and Cameron Redpath was put on the bench, and I took particular interest in watching McDowell in that first half. He played really well. I thought he did one really good break. Probably could have got rid of the ball and passed it to an outside back while he was doing that run, but he ended up going to ball to ground with that and recycling it for his team, so no problem there. But he looked pretty good, and I hadn't seen him play before, and a few people in the comments had mentioned that McDowell is a pretty good steady player. Well, we saw a couple of breaks from him in that first half, and I was pretty impressed with what I saw. It would have been interesting at halftime to hear both Andy Farrell talking to his Irish team and Gregor Townsend talking to the Scottish team, because I think Andy Farrell would have said to his boys, come on boys, get out there and really put the pressure on in the next 10 minutes. The first 10 minutes of the second half were going to be pivotal of this game. And I thought Ireland were building up enough momentum in that first half that they could crack Scotland early on in the second half. Gregor Townsend on the other side would have been wanting a lot more pressure from his team on attack, and the execution was just letting them down. So a few drop passes, a few kicks that weren't going in the right area. Van der Merwe had a couple of issues in that first half where he dropped the ball and didn't look like his efficient self that we've seen in the rest of the tournament. So I thought the beginning of the second half was going to be really critical for both teams, and whoever probably scored first was going to go on and have a good chance of winning this game. So it was no surprise early in the second half, in the first couple of minutes, that Ireland came out and put a lot of pressure on Scotland. In fact, they put together 12 phases of play, resulting in a penalty to Ireland, and Jack Crowley got the penalty over to put the score out to 10 points to 6. And I thought at that stage that Ireland were going to be able to go on and dominate this game. But what actually happened was Scotland hung in there, and I was pretty impressed with the way that they were doing it. And I thought that the intensity from Scotland in this game was probably better than we've seen in all of their other games at a sustained level. So I'm talking about them not falling off in this game like they did in some of their other games. They were really up for this game, Scotland, and they were putting in a big effort to try and get over top of this Irish team. But once again, Ireland just had enough in the bag, didn't they? And they've got enough class players across this team to really put the pressure on. I thought Jack Crowley was playing well again. I really think he's growing into this role. He's had an enormous amount of pressure. Don't forget, last year he only played 3 minutes in the Six Nations total tournament, and this year he's played in every game. He's had all that pressure put on him after Johnny Sexton's retirement, and I think he's done a really good job in building his way into this number 10 jersey. And after scoring those points early in the second half, even though it was just a penalty, Ireland kept putting the pressure on. It wasn't long before we saw them going very close again. Furlong going over, a try being disallowed. You'll let me know in the comments, of course, from Ireland if you thought that was a try or not. But the TMO made the decision, and it was no try being held up. So that was a interesting phase of play, because Ireland once again putting a lot of pressure on Scotland, but there was a big build up towards that, and the Scottish defence was doing very well. In fact, I was getting more impressed with Scottish defence as this game was going on. They were making an enormous amount of tackles, and by the time we got to around about the 70th minute of the game, the tackle count was up over 250 for Scotland versus Ireland's 90 something. So 3-4 times more tackles that Scotland were putting in this game, and it had to be sapping their energy. And as a result of that, I thought Ireland might come home in the last 10 minutes or so and score a couple of tries. The thing I was looking forward to watching this game was the impact of the bench, and we saw around the 50th minute mark or so McCarthy and Sheehan go off. They both played very well. Joe McCarthy's been a standout for me for this Irish team this year, and also Sheehan's played very well, scoring tries in some of the games as well. So they went off. The Irish reserves came on. Callagher came on as well as Healy, and we started to see the Irish work going forward. But the Scottish also made their reserves, brought their reserves on, and we saw some tenacity from them as well. So it wasn't a case of the reserves bench making a huge difference, I thought, in this particular game. What did make a difference is we saw Ashman get a yellow card, and he went off the field in around about the 64th minute. And during that time, when he was off the field, Ireland scored a try. So Scotland down to 14 men, trying to defend against this Irish team when they've got 15 men is difficult. When you've got 14, it makes it even harder. and Porter ended up going over to score a try, which in the end would end up being the match-winning try for Ireland in this particular game. A try was scored and converted in the 65th minute, so we still had 15 minutes left in the game. Could Scotland come back and achieve a good result out of this? Well, we were going to find out, because Scotland kept pressing in this game, and this is what impressed me with them in this game. They kept defending and they kept trying to attack. The only problem was their attack was missing that creativity and purpose that the Irish attack has. And for me, this is what stood out the most in this particular game. When Ireland got the ball, they looked threatening, they looked as though they had purpose. I remember, runs by James Lowe and Lamore got into the game as well. Archie looked dangerous every time he got the ball, and when Gary Ringrose came in, he made that fantastic break down the line, and Van der Merwe had to tackle him to save another potential try for Ireland. Saw the Irish defence going very hard at Scotland, and it was very difficult for Scotland to get through. We finally saw Hugh Jones get through the Irish defence. He scored a try in the last 3 minutes, which was converted by Finn Russell, brought the score back to 17-13. That was the final score of this game. But Ireland once again had done enough to win this game against a tenacious Scotland who hung in there for the 80 minutes and played their hearts out. I thought they were just lacking that creativity on attack. They didn't get them over the gain line and put more pressure on the Irish defence to score tries, and that's basically what it came down to for me in this game. Peter O'Mahony finished, if he is going to end his career at international level with this game, he finishes with a win. He finishes with a competition trophy as well, another Six Nations trophy for the Irish, back-to-back and 2 years in a row, and a fantastic performance by that team. I've been very impressed whenever they've had players out. We've had Mac Hansen out all this competition. I think Nash has done a very good job, Kelvin Nash, in replacing him. And James Lowe has played very well on the other wing throughout the whole tournament. So very, very good play from Ireland. Gibson Park got man of the match in this game. Archie impressed again. Ringrose is back now, and he looked pretty good for the time that he was on the field. But there's a bit of work to do in the Irish forwards, I think, and before they get to South Africa, they're going to have to clean a couple of things up, because there were moments in different games where they were tested and they were put under a lot of pressure, and South African forward pack is going to put them under more pressure than what we've seen, I believe, so far in the Six Nations campaign. I'm going to make another video shortly about what I think and how I think this Irish team's going to go against the Springboks when they go down there for that 2-match series, so stay tuned for this one. But overall in the Six Nations, if we have a look at the table now at the conclusion of this year's tournament, Ireland came out the winners, and obviously playing very well, and just losing that game against England in the last few seconds thanks to that drop goal by Marcus Smith. Other than that, not too many blotches on the Irish scorecard for this series. They scored the most points. They were the best defence by a long way, as you can see, with points scored against, just 60 points throughout this year's Six Nations. But I think what I would summarise this Irish campaign in this year's Six Nations in saying that I think they played really good rugby in that first game against France. They were really up for that game, and they did enough in the other games. They were unlucky not to win that game against England. It was just a sheer bit of brilliance in the last minute or so by England to win that game. But in the other games, without playing their best rugby, Ireland got home and found a way to win. And as I said earlier in the video, this is the mark of a great team. Teams that are able to come up against good competition and beat them despite not playing their very best level of rugby. That's going to have to change when they go to South Africa, because they're not going to be able to beat the Springboks without playing close to their very, very best rugby. And that's going to be a very intense, very exciting series to watch. And I can't wait for that trip for Andy Farrell's team to go down under. Really enjoyed watching this Irish team throughout the Six Nations campaign. There's been some standout players for me. I think Bundy Archie keeps his level of game at a very high level all of the time. I haven't seen him had a bad game. But then we've got to talk about the back two, in particular Van der Fleer and Doris. These guys just go game after game. They're fantastic in the breakdown. They do an enormous amount of work for this Irish team, and they're part of the reason why this Irish backline is able to function in the way that it has. A little bit of work to do in the front row, I think, for Ireland before they go to South Africa. But in terms of McCarthy and Byrne, fantastic play from them in the locks throughout this series. The backline's functioning well, and as I said, Jack Crowley, the more games he's getting more and more into this position, feeling more comfortable. He's just 24 years old, don't forget. and I think Andy Farrell's going to be happy with his performance over the Six Nations, because there has been a lot of pressure on Jack Crowley. When it comes to Scotland, disappointing, I think, throughout the Six Nations. A lot of would've, could've, should've. They were taken out by Italy in that game. Let's not underestimate the power of Italy so far in the Six Nations. They've been playing very, very well, but Scotland again, they just turn on and turn off during games, and they can't afford to do that. I mention a lot in my videos about teams being able to go the 80 minutes. In this day and age of rugby across the world, it's imperative that teams can play for 80 minutes. That's where the benches are vital, where the benches can come on and keep the momentum going for teams, and that's where Ireland have a very good connection for their team. And we're seeing that from France as well now, where they're able to come on with their big bench and go for the 80 minutes. Teams that can't do that, they're losing out big time. We're seeing Wales and how it's impacting them. It's even impacting Italy. We saw them fall off towards the end of their game against Wales, and we saw it again with Scotland in different games as well. They've got to be able to keep the intensity going for 80 minutes. Well, it was a good game without being a sensational game in the Aviva Stadium in Dublin over the weekend. Congratulations to Ireland, well-deserved champions of the Six Nations 2024, going back-to-back, of course, after last year's win as well. We've got plenty of rugby still coming up, and I'm going to be making lots of videos getting ready for some of those big games that are coming up between the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere teams. But before that, there's lots of other topics that we need to be talking about. So if you want to stick around with me here on Inside Rugby, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and hang around, because there's plenty more coming down the tube for you. Thanks very much for watching my videos. It's time to say adios from Mexico. I've loved watching the Six Nations this year. Thank you for all those that have participated in comments and been part of my channel. I love your comments. I've learned a lot from all of you that are sending through your amazing comments. Keep those going. We've got plenty more to look forward to in the future. I'll be back again really soon. Until then, stay safe, stay well, keep enjoying your rugby, and it's time to say bye for now.